February 12, 2026, 4:32 a.m. Deep within the bedrock monitoring gallery of Wolf Creek Dam, Kentucky. A fiber optic acoustic sensor designed to detect microscopic shifts in rock stress registers an anomaly. It is not a tremor. It is the signature of high-pressure fluid flow where there should be voidless, grouted concrete. The data cascades instantly to the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers' Nashville District Office. What the engineers see on their screens changes everything. This is not a theoretical exercise. The clock is ticking in real time. This massive engineering marvel, a 256-foot-high combination concrete and earth embankment spanning the Cumberland River, is holding back Lake Cumberland, the largest reservoir by volume east of the Mississippi. 722 billion gallons of water, a staggering volume equivalent to over 1 million Olympic-sized swimming pools, is seeking the path of least resistance. And right now, it is finding it. Since its completion in 1957, Wolf Creek Dam has been celebrated as a triumph of American infrastructure, built to control floods and generate hydroelectric power. But beneath millions of tons of clay, rock, and concrete lurks a foundational nightmare: karst limestone. This Mississippian-age rock formation is not a solid foundation. It is like geological Swiss cheese, riddled with caves, fissures, and solution channels, waiting to dissolve. The geological reality is terrifying. High-pressure water from the reservoir is continuously forcing its way through these hidden conduit networks. This process, known to engineers as piping, erodes soil particles within the embankment and dissolves the weak limestone, widening the voids. Every minute, the dam is under relentless hydraulic attack. The potential for disaster is catastrophic. Millions of people downstream are entirely unaware that they live in the fluctuating shadow of a structural high-risk failure. The internal U.S. Army Corps of Engineers report, designated WCD-SARA-2007, starkly classified Wolf Creek Dam as high risk, citing an imminent risk of human life. If the internal structure suffers a major collapse, the failure would not be slow, it would be sudden. A catastrophic failure could kill between 50 and 120 people instantly. The resulting wall of water, a surge of unprecedented force, would cascade damage across 3 states, totaling an estimated $6 billion in destruction, dismantling communities from the remote hills of Kentucky to the dense urban grid of Nashville, Tennessee. This is the Wolf Creek Dam story, a critical battle against dissolving geology, a massive infrastructure secret, and a catastrophe waiting inside America's heartland. At 7:22 a.m. on February 14th, 2026, a bank of high-precision, vibrating wire piezometers embedded within the earth embankment section of Wolf Creek Dam began transmitting data that sent shock waves through the Nashville district headquarters of the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. The sensors, which monitor internal water pressure, indicated a sudden, localized spike in the hydraulic gradient, a clear sign that reservoir water was successfully bypassing the $594 million barrier wall installed just over a decade ago. Simultaneously, a GNSS station, situated on the downstream slope of the dam, recorded a 14 mm horizontal offset toward the riverbed. In the world of geotechnical engineering, 14 mm is not a margin of error. It is a movement. This was followed by a cluster of microseismic events detected by the U.S. Geological Survey (USGS) network, centered at a depth of 180 feet below the dam's foundation. These weren't tectonic quakes. They were the acoustic signatures of internal collapse, the sound of limestone windows opening up as the rock dissolved under the weight of Lake Cumberland. To understand the crisis of 2026, we have to look at the invisible architecture of the ground itself. Wolf Creek Dam sits atop the St. Louis and Salem limestone formations. In most parts of the United States, Limestone is a sturdy foundation, but in southern Kentucky, it is a treacherous, karstic landscape. Over millions of years, slightly acidic groundwater has eaten away at the calcium carbonate, carving a subterranean labyrinth of caves, fissures, and vertical shafts. When the USACE finished the dam in 1957, they essentially placed a massive hydraulic piston on top of a sponge. The lake level can reach an elevation of 760 feet, creating a crushing 250 feet of vertical pressure. This head of water acts like a high-pressure jet, forcing its way into the cracks of the limestone. Once the water enters, the process of piping begins. The flow carries away fine silt and clay from within the dam's earth core, transporting it through the limestone caverns and dumping it downstream. As the soil is removed, the voids grow. As the voids grow, the flow increases. It is a self-accelerating cycle of destruction. The limestone isn't just a floor, it's a living, changing plumbing system, explains a simulated report from a senior USACE geotechnical specialist. We are fighting a war against chemistry and physics. Every gallon of water that seeps through a solution channel carries a microscopic piece of the dam with it. You don't see the failure until the ground literally vanishes beneath your feet. The monitoring data from February 2026 indicates that the 2013 remediation project, a massive concrete cutoff wall extending 275 feet into the bedrock, is being flanked. In karst geology, water is infinitely patient. If you block one channel, the increased pressure simply forces the water to find or create another. The 2026 data suggests the water has found a window at the contact point where the new concrete wall meets the ancient fractured bedrock. Engineers at the site are now observing what they call muddy flows at the downstream toe of the dam. Clear water is safe. It means the foundation is holding. But muddy water is the blood of a dying dam. It means the internal clay core is being liquidated and carried away. If this erosion continues unchecked, the result is a sinkhole failure. The top of the dam would suddenly drop as the internal cavity collapses, allowing the lake to overtop the structure in a matter of seconds. The USACE is currently coordinating with the National Weather Service and NOAA to model the incoming spring rains. If the Cumberland River watershed receives a heavy precipitation event, the reservoir level will rise, further increasing the pressure on the already compromised foundation. The vulnerability of the infrastructure is at an all-time high. We aren't just talking about a leak. We are talking about a structural compromise of a barrier that protects tens of thousands of American lives. The tension in the control room is palpable. Every sensor reading is a pulse check. Every millimeter of movement is a warning. The USACE has moved to Condition 2, Emergency Monitoring, the highest level of alert before a mandatory evacuation order is issued for the town of Burksville. The engineers are trapped in a high-stakes game of geological whack-a-mole, but the stakes are 722 billion gallons of water and the lives of those living in the valley below. The history of American dam engineering is written in the debris of geological hubris. To understand the stakes at Wolf Creek in 2026, we must look to the ghosts of our infrastructure's past. On March 12, 1928, the St. Francis Dam in California collapsed just hours after its chief engineer inspected a leak and declared it safe. The failure was caused by an undetected paleo landslide and the presence of unstable schist in the foundation, a geological oversight that mirrored the karst limestone dilemma of today. When the St. Francis failed, a 140-foot wall of water surged toward the Pacific, claiming over 400 lives. It remains one of the deadliest civil engineering failures in US history. 48 years later, in June 1976, the Teton Dam in Idaho provided a more direct and terrifying parallel to the piping currently threatening the Cumberland Valley. Teton was a massive earth-filled structure, much like the embankment section of Wolf Creek. As the reservoir filled for the first time, water began to pipe through fractures in the rhyolite bedrock, eroding the wind-blown silt of the dam's core from the inside out. Within hours, a small wet spot on the downstream face turned into a roaring whirlpool that consumed the dam. The resulting flood cost $2 billion in damage and killed 11 people, though the toll would have been thousands higher had the failure occurred at night without warning. At Wolf Creek, the threat is Teton Dam on a much larger, more complex scale. While Teton failed due to poor soil compaction and fractured volcanic rock, Wolf Creek is battling the chemical dissolution of its own foundation. This is a Johnstown scenario waiting to happen. The 1889 South Fork Dam failure in Pennsylvania, which killed 2,209 people, serves as the ultimate warning of what happens when massive volumes of water are released into a narrow, inhabited valley. In the case of Wolf Creek, we are not just looking at a single town, but an entire regional corridor. The physics of a Wolf Creek failure are governed by the critical gradient. Engineers define this as the point where the force of water moving through the soil exceeds the weight of the soil itself. Once this gradient is reached, the soil essentially liquefies and is washed away. At Wolf Creek, the piezometric head, the pressure of the lake, is constantly pushing against this limit. Modern USACE HEC-RIS, Hydrologic Engineering Center's River Analysis System modeling, paints a grim picture of the aftermath. In a sunny day breach scenario, where the dam fails without the warning of a major storm, the surge would be a kinetic hammer of 722 billion gallons. The dam breach analysis indicates that the town of Burksville, Kentucky, would be hit by a wall of water over 100 feet high within minutes. The velocity would be sufficient to scour the earth to bedrock, erasing every structure, road, and utility line. Further downstream, the surge would remain a lethal force. As the flood enters the wider plains of Tennessee, the wave would flatten, but its volume would remain staggering. In Nashville, the water would rise far above the historic 2010 flood levels, inundating the downtown core, the Nissan Stadium, and the vital power substations that feed the Tennessee Valley Authority (TVA) grid. The twist in the Wolf Creek story is the cyclic nature of its fixes. The 1968 to 1970 grouting program was supposed to be a permanent seal. It failed. The 1975 to 1979 concrete cutoff wall was marketed as the definitive solution. It failed. The $594 million barrier completed in 2013 was the state-of-the-art answer. Now, in 2026, the sensors tell a different story. The system coupling between the reservoir and the karst foundation is so tight that every time engineers block a pathway, the hydrostatic pressure simply migrates. It is an engineering paradox. The more we reinforce the dam, the more we increase the pressure on the unremediated sections of the rock. The USACE's Risk Management Center has noted that the statistical probability of failure at Wolf Creek is significantly higher than at other dams of similar size due to this geological unpredictability. We are operating on a probabilistic model where the data points are shifting in real time. The 2026 monitoring data suggests that the seepage velocity is increasing at a non-linear rate. This means the dissolution isn't just happening, it's accelerating. We are witnessing a battle between 20th century concrete and 300 million year old limestone, and the limestone has the advantage of time. The human dimension of the Wolf Creek crisis is a landscape of anxiety and calculated risk. For Marcus Vance, a senior hydrologist with the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, the morning of February 14, 2026 is the culmination of a decade of sleepless nights. Standing on the crest of the dam, Vance looks down at the downstream toe and sees the nightmare manifest. A boil of reddish-brown water erupting from the riverbed. This is not surface runoff. This is the dam's internal clay core, being vomited out through a limestone conduit 200 feet below his boots. The reservoir is hungry, Vance notes in a simulated field log. It's not just leaking anymore, it's eating the foundation. When you see this much sediment, you aren't looking at a crack, you're looking at a tunnel. 5 miles downstream, the town of Burksville, Kentucky, is waking up to the sound of the sirens. Sarah Miller, a 42-year-old mother and owner of a local hardware store, has lived in the shadow of the dam her entire life. For her, the high-risk classification was always a background hum, a piece of local trivia, until the emergency NOAA weather radio in her kitchen began screaming. The message is chillingly brief. Civil emergency message. Dam failure imminent. Evacuate to higher ground immediately. Do not head towards the river. Sarah has exactly 5 minutes to get her family into the car and climb the steep hills surrounding the valley. In the panic, the logistics of evacuation become a bottleneck. Kentucky State Highway 61, the primary artery out of town, is quickly choked with vehicles. This is the reality of the sword of Damocles over the Cumberland. If the dam fails, the water doesn't just flood, it obliterates. The surge arriving at Burksville would be a kinetic wall of liquid and debris, trees, boulders, cars, and pieces of the dam itself, moving at 30 miles per hour. The hydrodynamic force would be sufficient to strip the asphalt of the roads and the topsoil of the earth. As the evacuation orders spread, the impact ripples into the regional infrastructure. In Nashville, Tennessee, over 100 miles downstream, Elena Rodriguez, a grid coordinator for the Tennessee Valley Authority, TVA, is already executing emergency protocols. Wolf Creek Dam's 270 megawatt hydroelectric plant is the first to go dark as the structure's integrity fails. But the power loss is only the beginning. The surge would inundate the Cumberland River's coal-fired and natural gas plants downstream, potentially knocking out power to 2.5 million people across Kentucky and Tennessee. We aren't just losing a dam, Rodriguez states in an emergency briefing. We are looking at a systemic collapse of the regional energy corridor. If the substations in North Nashville go underwater, the blackouts will extend as far as Memphis and Louisville. The damage figures are being calculated in real time by FEMA and USACE economists. The $6 billion estimate is now considered conservative. In 2026, the Cumberland River Valley is more densely populated and technologically integrated than ever before. A catastrophic breach would sever vital telecommunications arteries, fiber optic cables buried along the riverbed that facilitate data flow for major logistics hubs in the American South. The port of Nashville, a critical link for the transport of petroleum and grain, would be scoured out, with barges turned into massive unguided projectiles. The ecological destruction would be total and irreversible. The Cumberland River is home to several endangered species, including the spectacle case mussel and the Cumberland darter. A dam breach would release decades of accumulated sediment from the bottom of Lake Cumberland, creating a slurry of anaerobic muck that would suffocate the river's ecosystem for hundreds of miles. The thermal shock of the cold reservoir water hitting the warmer downstream habitats would trigger a massive die-off of fish populations, an environmental scar that would take a century to heal. In the small community of Celina, Tennessee, residents watch the river with a mixture of terror and resignation. The local emergency management director, David Chen, describes the situation as a geological ambush. We've been told for decades the dam was fixed, Chen says, while coordinating a shelter-in-place order for those who can't reach the ridges. You see the billions of dollars being spent, the concrete being poured, and you want to believe it. But when the ground starts moving and the water turns brown, you realize that nature doesn't care about our budget. We are just guests on this limestone, and the host wants us out. The logistical nightmare extends to the interstate system. 140, a major transcontinental artery, crosses the Cumberland in Nashville. A Wolf Creek failure would put the bridge piers under unprecedented stress from debris impact. If 140 is severed, the national supply chain would reel, as thousands of trucks carrying goods from the east coast to the west are diverted onto overstressed backroads, adding millions to shipping costs and weeks to delivery times. This isn't just a Kentucky problem, it's a national security vulnerability. By midday, the US ACE has confirmed a partial internal collapse of the right rim embankment. The piping has created a void estimated to be 30 feet wide. Every second, 10,000 cubic feet of water is surging through the foundation. The emergency lake level drawdown has begun, with spillway gates open to their maximum capacity to relieve pressure. But it may be too late. The dam is bleeding out, and as the internal pressure shifts, new sinkholes are opening on the upstream face of the dam, swallowed by the reservoir. For the people downstream, the wait is agonizing. They are living through the exact scenario the engineers feared most, a failure that is not a single explosion, but a grinding mechanical disintegration of a giant. The personal stories of those in the path of the water, from the farmers in the bottomlands to the office workers in Nashville skyscrapers, are all now tied to a single, dissolving foundation of limestone. The secret of Wolf Creek is out, and the cost of knowing is a terrifying race against the inevitable. The immediate crisis of February 2026 may be mitigated by the desperate emergency drawdown of Lake Cumberland, but the long-term data suggests we are only resetting a timer that is destined to hit zero. As the US Army Corps of Engineers manages the reservoir at its lowest survival level in history, the surrounding region faces a permanent shift in reality. This isn't a one-time event. It is the opening of a new era of structural instability for the American South. The residual risk of Wolf Creek Dam has become a permanent feature of the US national infrastructure map. The future risk is not confined to Kentucky. The Wolf Creek story is a diagnostic preview of the gray swan events facing the 91,000 dams currently listed in the National Inventory of Dams. Of these, over 15,000 are classified as high hazard potential. The systemic coupling of aging 1950s infrastructure with the increasingly volatile atmospheric patterns of the late 2020s creates a perfect storm scenario. In 2027 and 2028, NOAA climate models predict an increase in the frequency of atmospheric river events, penetrating deep into the Ohio River Valley. For a dam built on karst, a sudden, massive influx of water is a death sentence. The hydrostatic pressure doesn't just push against the dam, it hammers the limestone conduits, forcing open new pathways faster than grout can be injected. The vulnerability of the downstream corridor is staggering. We are looking at a permanent red zone, stretching from Jamestown, Kentucky, through the heart of Nashville and down to the confluence with the Ohio River. If a catastrophic failure occurs during a major storm event, when the soil is already saturated and the spillways are at capacity, the cascading failure would be unstoppable. The destruction of Nashville's water treatment plants, situated in the flood-prone bends of the Cumberland, would leave millions without potable water for months. The loss of the Nashville port would disrupt the flow of 22 million tons of cargo annually, including the specialized steel and fuel supplies that power the regional economy. We have to move away from the fix-it-and-forget-it mentality, says a simulated 2026 report from the Association of State Dam Safety Officials. Wolf Creek proves that some geological foundations are in a state of permanent war with the structures we built on them. We are spending hundreds of millions of dollars to maintain a stalemate. Eventually, the limestone will win. The economic fallout is already spreading. Insurance companies in the Cumberland Basin are beginning to reevaluate dam breach inundation zones. In 2026 and 2027, property owners in the 50-mile downstream radius are seeing flood insurance premiums triple, or in some cases, policies are being cancelled altogether. The high-risk designation is a financial contagion, devaluing real estate and deterring industrial investment in a region that was once an economic engine. The shadow of the dam has become a literal barrier to growth. And yet, the data-rich reality is that we cannot simply remove Wolf Creek. Decommissioning a structure of this scale would take decades and cost billions, while simultaneously removing the flood protection that keeps the Cumberland from drowning Nashville during normal flood years. We are locked into a cycle of high-stakes maintenance. The future of Wolf Creek is a future of constant, expensive surveillance. New sensor arrays, utilizing satellite-based INSAR to detect millimeter-level surface deformations, and fiber-optic distributed sensing to listen for the sound of water moving through rock, will be the only thing standing between the population and a wall of water. The tectonic fury formula at Wolf Creek isn't about shifting plates. It's about the silent chemical fury of water against stone. As we move deeper into the 2020s, the inevitability of the karst clock becomes clear. The limestone beneath Kentucky is dissolving, one molecule at a time, 24 hours a day, 365 days a year. The grout will crack. The concrete will be bypassed. The pressure will find a way. The finale of this story hasn't been written in concrete, but it is written in the data. Follow the sensors. Watch the muddy water at the toe of the embankment. Listen to the sirens in Burksville. The USACE is fighting a heroic battle, using every tool in the modern engineering arsenal, but they are fighting against geological time. In the American heartland, a 722 billion gallon secret is vibrating under the pressure of its own weight. We aren't waiting for a disaster to happen. We are living through it in extreme slow motion. The clock isn't just ticking. It's echoing through the hollowed-out limestone of the Cumberland Valley. When the next massive storm cell forms over the Midwest, when the reservoir levels begin their relentless climb, the residents of the valley will look up at that massive gray wall and wonder if this is the day the limestone finally gives way. In the darkness beneath the dam, the water is already searching for the next hole. The data doesn't lie. The pressure is building, and in the end, nature always finds its level.